An investigation has been launched into whether police acted legally when they used anti-terror laws to detain the Brazilian partner of a Guardian journalist at Heathrow Airport for 9 hours. It'll be carried out by David Anderson, who's the independent reviewer of terror legislation. And at the same time, police are launching their own criminal investigation into data that was seized from David Miranda, which they claim could be gravely injurious to public safety. Our Home Affairs correspondent Simon Israel has more.
What happened 4 days ago airside at Heathrow is now to be the subject of an official inquiry. It's to examine whether police abused counter-terrorism powers to stop, question and confiscate material from David Miranda, who was on his way from Germany to Brazil. It's to be carried out by David Anderson QC, who earlier this week expressed some disquiet.
Well, at the moment, the only purpose you're supposed to use this power for is to determine whether the person you're talking to is a terrorist. So that's a fairly narrow power. Now, of course, it's used for, it can have incidental benefits. It can bring useful intelligence into the hands of the police and the intelligence agencies. But it's only supposed to be used for that one purpose, and it's important to ensure that it's not used illegally.
In a letter to the Home Secretary this afternoon, the reviewer of terrorism legislation, David Anderson, makes clear his intention to question all involved, not just police.
I know that I can count on your support in ensuring that I have full access to personnel and to relevant classified materials for which you are responsible, insofar as is necessary for the purposes of my investigation.
No one knows where this inquiry may go, but it's emerged the Met today has begun a criminal investigation on the basis of the data they've already seized from Mr. Miranda. Tens of thousands of pages they described in court as highly sensitive material, gravely injurious to public safety. But it's data Mr. Miranda wants to prevent the government from copying, sharing or distributing to any foreign authority or agency, notably the US. Today, he got a limited injunction against the Home Secretary.
The Home Office and police now have 7 days to prove that there is a genuine threat to national security, rather than make mere assertions as they have done today. The undertakings that the police sought were stopped in their tracks, and some of the basis on which the police sought to justify their position was roundly rejected.
Conversely, the Met, on the other hand, said it was pleased with the outcome. Anti-terrorist officers can carry on examining the material, whether or not it was legally obtained. And as to the nature of its criminal investigation, the Yard was silent. Not prepared, it said, to discuss any further detail.
Well, I'm joined now from North London by Keith Vaz MP, who's the chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Vaz. How significant do you think this review by David Anderson, the independent reviewer of terror legislation, into the detention of David Miranda is?
Well, I think it's very welcome. I spoke to David Anderson yesterday because, as you know, the Home Affairs Select Committee in a few weeks' time will be starting an inquiry into international terrorism and crime. And Mr. Anderson was very clear that this issue was of interest to him. And I think he's done absolutely the right thing in writing to the Home Secretary, informing her that he is going to hold an inquiry, that he's not going to be limited to the circumstances of what happened to Mr. Miranda. But it seems, by what I've heard of the letter, that it's going to be as wide as possible. And of course this is very welcome. That's why he exists, to be able to scrutinise the government on issues of this kind. He clearly has the powers to do so. I'm not sure he has all the resources that the independent reviewer might want, because we've in the past commented that we thought that the independent reviewer ought to have more support than he has, but he hasn't mentioned that. So I think it's important that that's happened, because this is a very complicated case which has triggered all kinds of information coming from the Guardian about the involvement of the Cabinet Secretary and others. It has, and we had a new chapter in it
today when we discovered it slipped out in court that there's now a criminal investigation into David Miranda. What could that possibly be about?
Indeed. Well, I'm afraid I'm the last person to know this, because nobody shares any information with me, but it's interesting that that's happened. And if you look back to the sequence of events, this probably explains why the White House, Downing Street and Theresa May were informed in advance of Mr. Miranda being stopped. So this wasn't just some chance attempt to question someone under a power that was quite open. This was obviously something that had been thought through very carefully, and that's why Mr. Miranda was stopped. That's the only conclusion that I can reach. But of course, until we have the full facts, and I hope to hear from the Commissioner tomorrow on some aspects of this, not necessarily the detail, but more about the process, then we will be better informed. But at the moment, obviously, this story is changing almost every day.
Yes, and we'll keep up with it every day. Thank you very much for talking to us, Mr. Vaz.